Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our Literary Cafe. So excited for this event today. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. The Literary Cafe was created by the foundation, and they are pleased to collaborate with Kimberly Hensle Lowrance and Marjan Kamali on this series. I would also like to thank Christine Dean and the Community Center for partnering with us, allowing us to hold our event in this beautiful space. And finally, I'd like to thank the Public Libraries in Ashland, Bedford, Needham, and Tewksbury for partnering with us on this program. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions and you are joining us in person, please raise your hand and I'll bring over a microphone. And if you are on Zoom, please put your questions into the Q&A or chat. Jillian from Bookends is in the lobby and she has all of Marjan's books. Marjan will be happy to sign your copy. Last thing, the bathrooms are along this corridor if you are unfamiliar with building Wi-Fi. Now I'd like to introduce our host. Kimberly Hensle Lowrance is a member of the Cary Library Foundation Board and a producer and on-air host for A Mighty Blaze, an online literary organization. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly, who is going to introduce our very special guest this evening.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight in person, and to everyone who's joining us on Zoom. I'm like looking to the computer. We're really thrilled that you took time out of your busy schedules to join us for tonight's Literary Cafe. Thank you to Helen from the library, for Marielle Ringo from the foundation, and for the staff here at the Community Center for making tonight's event come together. So as Helen mentioned, we've been doing the Literary Cafe for a while now, bringing authors to Lexington, and we've had authors talking in a variety of genre: young adult, climate fiction, memoir, nonfiction, contemporary fiction, and we've had a wonderful experience being in conversation with these authors. Marjan has hosted most of them. I've just taken over hosting duties this year. It's been a delight to have these authors here in our community. You can watch all of them if you haven't seen them already on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look for Cary Library. Tonight, however, is an extra special Literary Cafe because we get to be in conversation with our very own Marjan Kamali. And yeah. And when Helen introduced me, she forgot to mention one thing, which is, or I didn't tell her to mention this, which is I am a member of the Marjan Kamali fan club, which we are all members of the Marjan Kamali fan club. And so tonight being in conversation with Marjan is extra special for me. So we're going to be in conversation. I have so many questions. I imagine you have questions for Marjan as well. So just keep them in your mind and we will come to you later on. We'll have a roving mic. We'll go around and get as many as we can. Also to our friends on Zoom, we'd love to hear your questions as well. And again, all of Marjan's books are outside. Many, many thanks to Bookends for being here tonight. So we will do signing afterward. So let me tell you about our guest of honor. What is she going to say? Okay. Marjan Kamali is the award-winning author of The LION Women of Tehran, which came out this July, The Stationery Shop, which was a national and international bestseller, and Together Tea, a Massachusetts Book Award finalist. She is a 2022 recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. She's currently the Fannie Hurst Writer in Residence at Brandeis University. Her novels, these 3 beautiful novels, have been published in translation in more than 25 languages. And you can find her writing in the Wall Street Journal, Literary Hub, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. She is also a member of the Cary Library Foundation Board. Marjan holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of California at Berkeley, a master's of business administration from Columbia University, a master's of fine arts in creative writing from New York University. She was born in Turkey to Iranian parents, and she spent her childhood in Turkey, Iran, Germany, Kenya, and the United States, and she is now a Lexingtonian. Okay. And so we're gonna be talking tonight about The LION Women of Tehran, and the reviews of this book are terrific. I'm going to share just a couple of the things that have been written about this novel. It's been called a touching portrait of courage and friendship, a mesmerizing tale, gorgeous, gripping, novel, I like that one, gorgeous and gripping, novel that paints a layered portrait of female friendship, unexpected cultural shifts, and second chances. It's also been described as insightful, compassionate, and grounded in historical detail. But gorgeous and gripping is my favorite.
I didn't know it was gripping. I'm so happy.
It is gripping,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we're going to begin, Marjan, with a reading. You're going to do a little bit, share a little bit of an excerpt. And could you also tell our audience a little bit about this book?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Kimberly, for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here in Lexington. I've lived all over the world, and Lexington, dare I say, is my home. And I'm deeply proud of that fact because I searched for a home for so long. So happy to be here with all of you. And thank you to the Cary Library Foundation and Cary Memorial Library, where much of these 3 books were written in a little cubicle. So that's why the library means so very much to me. So the LION Women of Tehran came out on July 2nd. I feel like it's just new in the world, but many people have already read it. I'm hearing back from readers. It's been super exciting. This is a friendship story. It's about 2 girls who meet when they're 7 years old. They come from very different backgrounds, but they form a fast friendship. And we see them go through the joys of childhood. I really wanted to capture girlhood, which I think is elusive in real life as well as in fiction. And they go through the ups and downs of adolescence. They go off to university together until one of them betrays the other. But don't you worry, they reconnect decades later. And there's, I don't think it's a spoiler to say there's a reconciliation, because by now, if you've read any of my books, you know that things go wrong and then they go right. So this book is very dear to my heart because I wrote it during the pandemic. And then as I was writing it, real life events in Iran occurred that moved me deeply, moved the world. And so in a way, the ending was informed by history as we lived it. But I thought I would just read a short excerpt to give you a flavor of this story. And as Julie Andrews says, I'll start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. And this way I don't have to spend too much time giving you context, because if you were to pick up this book at bookends, for example, or at the Cary Library, you would just start with chapter 1. All right, so chapter 1, December 1981. I stood on the lacquered floor, a small woman in black with a rectangular name badge on my chest. My coiffed, contented look was calculated so I'd appear not just satisfied, but quietly superior. In America, I'd learned the secret to being a successful salesperson was to act like one of the elite, as if spritzing perfume on customers' blue-veined wrists was doing them a favor. A sea of haughty New Yorkers swerved to avoid my spray. Thank God for the more down-to-earth women, the cooks and bakers coming up to the first floor from the basement home goods section. They were too polite to reject the fragrant droplets I offered. Orange, lily, jasmine, and rose notes nestled in the lines of my palms and the fiber of my clothes. Look at you, Ellie. Soon you'll take over this whole brand. I better watch my back. My friend and coworker Angela, returning from her cigarette break, sidled up and whispered in my ear. The scent of her Hubba Bubba gum couldn't hide the smoke on her breath. I shivered at the reek of tobacco. The bitter, sour notes would forever remind me of one long ago night in Iran. The night when an act of betrayal changed the entire course of my friendship with Homa and both of our lives. From the moment I'd read Homa's letter last night, I'd been a wreck. I batted away Angela's compliments, said I wasn't doing all that well, really, and that I had a headache because I hadn't eaten all day. I just might faint, I added, with a touch of melodrama. It was a relief when Angela was whisked away by a needy customer. My mother always said the envy of others invites the evil eye to cast doom on us. She'd often told me that being perceived as too competent, happy, or successful could summon misfortune. I knew belief in the power of other people's jealousy and the jinxing of an evil eye needed to be cast off. But at the age of 38, in the middle of that massive Manhattan department store, I was still unwittingly beholden to superstition. The truth of who I was could not be escaped, nor could the flaw I had spent years trying to quash and erase. The guilty one had always been me. All right.
In your author's note in the Lion Women of Tehran, you writing about strong Iranian women has been a central theme in my life. Why? Why has this been a theme that you have clung so much to, that you've made such a priority?
I think because I've been surrounded by them. I've been surrounded by them, and on the one hand, I've lived the truth of having these women in my life, and then the jarring situation of having them portrayed very differently in media. So, you know, I always was amused and surprised to hear that Iranian women are meek and submissive. I don't know if they've met the women in my family. So I really felt that I wanted to give a more nuanced portrayal of women that it's not that they're not talked about. They're talked about a lot, but almost with one note.
You call them lion women. Shirzan. And that is a theme in this book, that Homa and Ellie are lion women and they aspire to be such. Was that something you wanted when you were a young woman, to be a lion woman?
I did. I was very much a cub, but I heard this phrase a lot. So Shirzan is a Persian phrase that literally translates to lion women, and it connotes women who are strong, opinionated, fierce, unstoppable. And when you're living in a country that is a patriarchy, and I would argue, I don't mean just Iran when I say that, it's very empowering to know that this concept exists and that there's a name for it and that it's something you can aspire to.
Homa and Ellie aspire to become lion women when they're very young. It is definitely a goal in their life. And their friendship, and one of the things I loved about this book was how their friendship shapes them as people. And it's really a life-changing friendship for both of them. They're competitive with one another. They are loving. They make mistakes. They are forgiving. And I wondered about that friendship, the crafting of the friendship in this novel. Was that something that you set out to do? Like, I want to write about a friendship, or did it come to you? Can you talk a little bit about the description, the development of the friendship that they share?
I really wanted to write a friendship story because I had just written a love story. And so the Stationery Shop was, you know, this massive sort of romantic love story. And then I thought, friendship is so sort of underrated. And I feel our friends shape us just as much as our lovers do. And friendship breakups are just as heart-wrenching as romantic ones. And especially childhood friendships, they don't need to last in order for the influence on our lives to last. And I thought back to a friend I had when I was in Iran during the pandemic, during lockdown. I came across her posts on Instagram, and just seeing her face again, it almost brought a visceral physical reaction to me. And I could remember how we used to play together. I could remember doing homework together. I could remember meeting her mother, but I could just also remember what it was like to be with her. And I wanted to capture that because I feel for all of us, whether it's when we're children or when we're adults, friends, it's not that they make the world less cruel or that they make bad things not happen. they just make it easier to navigate those things. And they bring a comfort and a joy and just a, a relaxation that is so needed. So I wanted to capture all of that, and it was very intentional for me to write about friendship.
There's a great deal of forgiveness in their relationship. They are able to overlook one another's faults, one another's mistakes, and really love one another in a way that I think becomes a model for each of them in their other relationships. Would you?
They do teach one another forgiveness and teach one another basically how to handle being with another person. And that's the other thing. I think a lot of times our childhood friendships are almost practice for our romantic ones, right? They're the first time we have to deal with the ups and downs of another person and tolerate their idiosyncrasies and also benefit from their gifts. In the beginning, Ellie is very jealous of Homa, and she's not as able to be forgiving. But I think for her, the book takes place over the 50s, 60s, 70s, early 80s, and another time period, which is a bit of a spoiler. But for Ellie, throughout the course of her friendship with Homa, what she learns from this friend is the art of forgiveness, more than she ever planned on, because there's something she's not even aware of that needs to be forgiven. Yeah.
You mentioned that the book takes place in all these different decades. And I really wondered as I read the book, what your research process was like, because we do jump through time so much. And there's so many exquisite details to ground us in these time periods. Like even the opening sequence, I can see Bloomingdale's, right? I can see the women walking through the store and smell the perfume. And I wondered if you can talk a little bit about your process of imbuing the novel with historical details. How did you go about researching?
Well, there's a lot of books that one can read, like nonfiction accounts of what Iran was like in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s. There's YouTube videos, there's shows that you can see excerpts from, there's songs you can listen to. But I was also in a position of privilege because I was able to interview people in my own family who were there at the time. And it was very important to me to capture the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, because the country has changed so much since then, and changed so much during those decades. And so I felt like I was trying to capture a time and place that's gone. And I think so much of writing fiction is just trying to capture time. You know, it's like slipping through our fingers. And in a way, we're memorializing a place. We're memorializing a culture, a time that's vanishing. And so speaking to the elders in my family was key, absolutely key.
And am I right that your mother attended the high school that Ellie and Homa?
Yes, so due to my, you could say, laziness,
resourcefulness,
thank you. Delete resourcefulness. I made Ellie and Homa born the same year my mother was born, and I made them attend the high school she attended, because that way I could get the details correct. And so I was able to say, you know, when you went to elementary school, what was your uniform like? What did you do on your lunch breaks? Where did you go on your lunch breaks during high school? What sandwiches did you order? You know, endless questions that I think made her quite beleaguered. But at the same time, I was able to capture these details. And I wanted to capture mid-20th century Iran and later early 1980s New York, which is a whole other time and place that's very dear to me. So you mentioned Bloomingdale's, and New York City in the early 80s is also now gone, right? It's a very different New York we go to. So yes, I worked really hard to capture it. And my biggest compliment is when a reader writes to me and says, I'm so happy you captured your youth in the 50s. I'm like, no. Thank you.
What does your mother think about the book? Since there's so much of her story.
I think she said to me, with each book your writing improves. And that's a compliment. That's a compliment. I think she's astonished that people are interested in reading about women in Iran. She kept saying, no one's going to read this. Write about Australia. And I said, no, they will. And then she said, well, Iranians will, but you want other people to. And I said, no, but they will. I think they have the capacity to relate to them. So
Yes, tonight is a good example that they will.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
In the acknowledgements of the book, you write that your curiosity about Iran is endless.
Mhm.
What have you learned about Iran while writing this book that surprised you?
I've learned I have so much more to learn. I didn't live there very long, so I'm very open about that. I only lived there between the ages of 2 and 5, and again, 9 to 10 and a half. But that second segment was a very pivotal time because it was right after the revolution. It was during the start of the war. And I feel like I will go to my grave trying to figure out Iran. I will go to my grave wanting to know more and wanting to understand the history. It's such a rich history. In the US, we think of it starting in 79, but there's thousands and thousands of years pre-79. And so I've also learned, and we can talk about this another night, but I've also learned Iran and the US are so darn similar. So don't start like sending me emails, but they are. So there.
I might argue that the food in Iran sounds much better than the food in the food in this book. I mean, it's just like the way you describe the food and how much love is imbued in the food and how much it represents culture and family. It's so beautiful. And that reminds me, we should talk about this little, Marjan has a recipe book. Do you want to tell people what that is?
Yes. So as Kimberly said, there's a lot of food in this book because it's impossible to write about these characters without talking about what they eat and what they cook. Homa and Ellie, they bond a lot through cooking and learning to cook together. I got so many questions about food with the Stationery Shop and with Together Tea that this time my publisher published this little recipe book. It's sort of the four dishes that Ellie and Homa make. Yes, you too can have one because we're gonna when I sign, I'm gonna give these out. And honestly, we only highlighted 4. We could have been like 15, but every dish that Ellie and Homa cook together is one I cook. Every dish they enjoy is one I've enjoyed. And so in this little recipe book, I talk a little bit about what the dish means to me personally in my life and what it means to the 2 main characters in this novel. I really think that we are what we eat. And I don't mean it the way that saying is often referred to. I mean that it's our whole life what we eat and who we eat with and what we cook and what we don't cook. So yeah, there's a lot of food.
Were there specific dishes that you were like so important to you to include in the novel when you began writing? Do you have like a little list, like I have to have this one and this one?
Yes.
Which one was the one that was like?
Well, I kind of had to go back to the Stationery Shop and think, well, which ones did I highlight there? I can't keep doing the same one. There is a specific dish that sort of plays a role in the plot. It's called Fesenjun, and it's a walnut and pomegranate chicken dish, and it's Homa's favorite. And it's actually there's a scene at a huge party in a kitchen where Ellie's jealousy is triggered and Fesenjun plays a role. So that's all I'll say. Yeah.
We're trying to have no spoilers.
I know, we're trying to have no spoilers. I think so far we've been
pretty
yes,
good.
yeah.
The other relationship in this novel that I found really intriguing was Ellie's relationship with her mother. They have a complicated relationship. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Ellie's relationship with her mother is incredibly complicated because Ellie's an only child. She comes from wealth. Her family loses her wealth when her father dies when she's 7, and she and her mom are basically left to figure things out. They're the father's brother, Uncle Masood plays a pivotal role too. I wanted to write about a narcissist, and let me make it clear, this is not my mother. Not my mother. But I wanted to write about a narcissist because I'm fascinated by narcissists. And as writers, I think we are always also curious about the human condition and different personalities. And for other reasons, narcissists have been on my mind. And so I wanted to make Ellie. We won't go there, but I think you know. So anyway, I really am trying to unpack this personality type. Thank you, type. Yes. And then again, as I wrote Ellie's mother, it's impossible to write a character as the writer without eventually having some empathy for the character. And as I wrote her, I realized, wait a second, what would make her this way? Why was she like this? And so that whole relationship evolved, and I learned so much from it. So it was rewarding for me just as a person. Yeah.
Can you talk about bravery in the novel? Because I think of Homa as a character who's very brave. She chooses to speak out, speak up against the government and policies that she disagrees with.
Yes.
She wants to become a judge. She has great aspirations for making change. And then Ellie has a different approach. And Ellie's mother has a different approach. And the way that they all respond to the government and the changes are all, you did a great job of showing that not everybody was marching in the streets, that lots of people have different approaches and different responses to oppression. Can you talk a little bit about bravery?
Yeah, I think we all know Homas, people who see something wrong and take action, see an injustice, want to fix it, go march in the streets, go to school, get that law degree, try to, want to make change, are just activists, idealists, want to make society more equitable, want to make things fairer. And then there are people like Ellie. We're really happy for people like Homa to do that, who see what's wrong and say, this is wrong, but I just don't have the bandwidth to deal with this. Homa, you go. Good luck to you. Homa is brave, and I wanted to depict her as that rare person who is purely authentic, not a phony bone in her body. But Ellie's brave in her own way too, because we always laud and celebrate people who are leading extraordinary lives, but it's so brave to lead an ordinary life. And for Ellie to lead an ordinary life requires a ton of bravery, and that's what we never talk about. And especially for women, we talk about feminism as the Homa marching in the street. But what about the woman whose dream in life is to be a wife and a mom, and how hard it is to be just that? And I don't mean just that, I mean to be all of that. That too requires a tremendous amount of daily bravery.
And she also, oh, actually, I was going to say something and I realized that was a spoiler, so I won't say it. It's hard. I know it's hard. Yes, so bravery. And Ellie is also an interesting character in that she was your entry point to this novel.
Yes.
And so that's really intriguing to me that she was a character in another book you were writing.
Yes.
And then she became so persistent.
Yes.
That she became
the main character.
And this, so talk a little bit about
finding your way. Those of you who may not know, after the Stationery Shop came out, that's my second book. I started to write the third book, and it was about 4 moms in Lexington, Massachusetts, who have their firstborns applying to college and who are obsessed with their children getting into a really good college.
Everyone in Lexington laughs.
Yes. Boy, did I have to use my imagination. So I started writing this book. We had pitched it to Simon and Schuster. My agent knew I was writing this book. I had written over 120 pages of this book. And the moms, to sort of vent, would go to a cafe on Mass Ave. I love being in Lexington because I can talk about the Lexington stuff and you know what I'm talking about. Right in between the pharmacy and the stationery shop, which is no longer the stationery shop. But I had a Miss Ellie's cafe there, and they would go there to hang out. And then there was an elderly Iranian woman who owned the cafe. And then as I wrote that book, I was like, I don't care about these mothers. I don't care about their kids. I really don't care where they go to college. And what I really care about is that woman who owns the cafe. She seems kind of interesting. So one day I called my agent and I said, yeah, I know I've written but I just don't care anymore. And she was like, okay. And then I said, well, if I don't care, the reader won't care. So maybe I should write about what I care about. And she said, okay, what do you care about? And I said, I care about the cafe owner. And I plucked her out. And she was 77, but then I went back to when she was 7.
Did that happen in your other novels, that a character, perhaps in another story or in a short story, or became the entry point to your novel? How do you begin a story? Is it character?
Always a character.
Always
a character. So all 3 books, I start with the character, and I have the character, and I know the character. I know what they eat for breakfast. I know what they look like. I know the kinds of shoes they like to wear. I don't know what happens to them. I don't know what happens to them, but I know them. And then I sort of do a lot of character development. Like I think about, what do they regret the most? Who do they miss the most? What have they lied about the most? And I start to write diaries in the character's voice, which when you live with other people, you should always label. Right? Because with the stationery shop, one day my daughter picked up this notebook and she was like, are you having an affair? No, that's my character. That's my character speaking. It's not me. So yeah, so I always start with the character, and then I figure out what's going to happen, which is really difficult, actually.
What was the question that you asked Ellie that led you to Homa?
What do you regret the most? I thought to myself, Ellie, I know what you have for breakfast, but what do you regret the most? And then I came up with the plot. And I wanted it to be a story of sacrifice and forgiveness. So in my head, I was like, someone's going to make a sacrifice, and someone's going to have the generosity of spirit to forgive. And that's how it kind of bubbled up.
So there's a concept in writing that you are a plotter or a pantser. And so for our audience that are not writers, a plotter is someone who puts together an outline and this is going to happen and then this is going to happen. And a pantser is someone who just writes by the seat of their pants and kind of just goes with the flow. Some people fall in the middle.
Yes.
Where do you?
Plantsers, right?
Plantsers.
Yeah.
What are you, Marjan?
I'm a pantser. In the first draft, very much a pantser, because I just go with the flow. I was told by my writing teacher, keep the pen moving across the page, keep your fingers on the keyboard, don't stop, just go with the flow. So I don't worry in that first draft. I'm just writing by the seat of my pants. But then for the ensuing drafts, and they are multiple, I become a plotter. And then I'm really intentional about where things should be so that it has a maximum emotional impact on the reader.
What was your favorite scene to write in this book?
There is this scene in the middle of the book. Ellie and Homa are now 20, and it's March 1963. And it's a special night because it's the last Tuesday night before the first day of spring, which is the Persian New Year. And the tradition is to jump over bonfires. And I have them jump over a large bonfire together, holding hands, which required physics and gravity to work out, and also all the atmosphere to work out. That was my favorite scene to write because time slowed down. Time slowed down, and I sort of, if you think of a film, I made it in slow motion, and every sort of fleck of fire, every tendril of smoke that they inhaled, everything they could hear, like I just really slowed it down, and that was really satisfying to write because I felt like I jumped over it.
Did you actually build a bonfire in your backyard and jump over it?
No, but by writing about it, I felt like I had, like
Yeah.
I got this secondhand high
Yeah.
adrenaline from writing about it.
Was that something that you had done as a
I
younger
had
person?
jumped over fire a lot as a child during this festival of fire, jumping over bonfires. And then in the United States, in Watertown, you can jump over like fake fires because the fire department's there and they're all worried.
Welcome to America.
Yeah, so yeah, I just kind of remember when we used to jump over actual fires. Yeah, it's kind of thrilling.
Oh, would I imagine?
Yeah.
And on the page, it is thrilling. That
Maybe that's
moment.
where the gripping came from.
I think
in that review.
there's many elements of the book that are gripping. The book is told primarily in Ellie's point of view, though we do spend time with Homa as a narrator and someone else, who I'm not going to say who it is because I don't spoiler. How did you decide that? I mean, I know Ellie was the character who appeared to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she would be your main narrator.
Yeah.
Or had she just fixed, so she just had such a tighter grip that you couldn't imagine another narrator?
It was gonna be Ellie. It was gonna be Ellie all the way. And then I was so proud of myself too, because this is the first novel where I was writing primarily in first person only. In the other two novels, I do a lot of close third person point of view. And I was doing Ellie's voice, Ellie's voice, Ellie's voice, and then something was missing. And sometimes as writers, we're very dense. And I remember I kept thinking, something's missing. And then one day I went on a walk on the bike path. I love being in Lexington on the bike path. And I thought, oh my gosh, of course I have to write Homa's point of view. Of course that's what I have to do. And I'd been avoiding it for so long. And I was really worried I wouldn't differentiate between them. And I didn't want them to be wildly different, but at the same time, they are the same age. They go to the same schools. I didn't want them to be too exaggerated, but I also wanted them to be, distinct enough. And then I came up with a little way of doing that, and then that all worked out. You know what I did? Okay.
Yes,
Yes, so we'll
yeah.
talk about that.
You've been on book tour this
Mhm.
summer and you've gone all over the country. What was an unexpected reader interaction or something that happened during the book tour that made it extra special?
Okay, so something that happened when I was in Santa Monica. I'm going to share this. Obviously, I was on book tour for the LION Women of Tehran, but one woman raised her hand and she talked about the Stationery Shop, the second book, which is a very popular book. And she said, after I finished the Stationery Shop, I cried. And I'm like, okay, well, everybody cries. And then she said, and then what I did is I called my first love. And we just celebrated our 2-year anniversary. That moment in Santa Monica. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. And then everybody started to clap. And then nobody wanted to ask another question. And now she follows me on Instagram and I keep seeing pictures of them.
Writer and matchmaker.
Yes. I told her she needs to name her first child after me. Let's see what happens.
Usually when I read a book, I think that there's a question that the author is trying to answer by writing the story, that there's something that they want us to think about and that they hope that their book answers it.
Yes.
What is the question that you hope is posed in this novel?
That's such a good question.
Thank you.
And it's always the same question. Every time I write a book, it's always, 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 how does love outlast loss? That's my thing. And whether it's lovers who don't get to be together or I just spoiled the Stationery Shop for you. Or a friendship story, I won't spoil that. It's always, or mother, daughter, parent, child. How does love outlast loss? Because it does.
And there are endless ways that you can examine that question.
Mhm.
It's both sad and hopeful. It's a sad,
Yes,
hopeful
it's
question.
sad and it's true. And it's just fascinating to see the very different ways that that plays out in our lives with different people.
Are your books available in Iran?
They are, the Stationery Shop has been translated into Persian twice. I don't know about the other two yet, but I know they're available because I get Instagram messages from people in Iran. Instagram is the one social media platform that is allowed, so that's why I get them there.
The book is dedicated to the women of Iran and the women life freedom campaign's the wrong word, but movement. I felt like it captured all of our consciousness. And then as with most human problems, we forget things very quickly, and it feels like it's not center stage, and at least in American media anymore. But I imagine it is still front and center in Iran.
It is. Yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of the day that a young woman named Mahsa Jina Amini was arrested in Iran for wearing improper hijab. She later died while in police custody, but the injustice of this whole situation sparked a movement called the Women Life Freedom Movement, where girls and women poured into the streets because they'd had enough. They'd had enough of their lives being controlled by these fundamentalist men, and men joined them. There were many men who also were killed in these protests. So we no longer hear about it on the news. It's not like the second anniversary, to my knowledge, sparked a new wave of protests. But, you know, you can snuff out a fire, but the ashes remain hot, and the ashes are still there. Changes have happened, small, I mean, at such a high cost though. But yes, I think about the women of Iran. I mean, obviously I do, and I don't expect all of you to, because there are other topics in the world that take over, like you said, the news cycle and people's attention. But the women in Iran, and particularly in Afghanistan, who are suffering way, way, way more, I would say, shouldn't be forgotten. We have left them to be completely and utterly robbed of their agency, and it's a deep, deep sorrow, I think.
Books like yours are important to remind us of these stories of what's happening around the world. If the news becomes too crowded with other things, we have fiction to teach us. There's an element of education in a book like this as well, opening people's eyes. Do you see that responsibility when you write? Do you carry that with you?
I used to more when I was younger. When I was first starting out, I remember thinking, okay, I will teach everyone everything there is to know. And then I read a great quote from Beverly Cleary, the Ramona books.
I did not call that.
Yeah, it changed my life. She said, you know, as writers of fiction, it's not our job to educate. It's our job to tell a good story. And that liberated me, because I was like, you know what? People can Google this. I'm going to tell a good story. It is not my job to educate everybody. And that really liberated me. But there is a sense of responsibility, of course, because for a lot of readers in the US, they only have encountered Iran through a book like mine. So it's not like there's a wide variety of other, you know, narratives. But I think the whole Beverly Cleary quote really is what I go. At the end of the day, I'm a novelist and I'm a storyteller. I'm not a historian, even though there's such strong elements of history. But it's that E.L. Doctorow quote too, which is history books tell you what happened. Fiction tells you how what happened made people feel.
Yes. And that's what you remember. That's what we remember.
Yes.
The feelings.
Yes.
Where are Ellie and Homa now?
Oh.
Do you, when your book is over, when the book is finished, do you carry them forward, or are they
Unhealthily
resting?
so, unhealthily so. I get super attached. After the Stationery Shop was over, I couldn't start another book. And then one day my agent sat me down and she said, You need to write a letter to the four main characters. You need to tell them what they meant to you, and you need to thank them for their service, and you need to say goodbye.
Did you do that?
I did do it.
And did it help?
That was the only way I could start a new book.
It's fascinating.
Yes, I haven't written my letters to these two yet. I'm not ready.
You can understand that. They're your friend too.
They're my friends. I learned so much from them. I know I made them up. I made them up. They're not based on real people. I made them up, but they're real to me. They're more real to me than a lot of real people. Like they are so real to me, and I admire them. I learned from them. We experienced a lot together. So I'm not ready yet, but I will write the letter because apparently I have to write another book. So then I have to write the letter.
In the epigraph of the book, there's a quote about waves. If you have it, you can open it up and read it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's a beautiful epigraph that talks about just the idea that you see an event happening, you think it's solitary, all it's happening on its own, but it's actually been in motion for some time. I felt like that's what Homa and Ali are. Their story is a continuum of these women who are existing today in Iran.
Yes, I mean, people don't know the Iranian women's rights movement is over 100 years old. The first women's rights organization was established in the 1920s. And I didn't know this about waves. When the wave hit the shore, I thought, oh, the wave just hit the shore. I didn't realize that that took thousands of years of wind and current and temperature and all kinds of different elements for that one wave to finally hit the shore. And that's why I use that as an epigraph, that quote, because there's so much going on today that we don't realize has such a long history behind it.
What do you hope your readers take from your book, or how do you hope they feel at the end?
I hope there's a sense of healing. I hope that people finish this book and feel a bit more connected to the people in their own lives by virtue of seeing the relationship between Ellie and Homa. And I also hope there's some sense of closure and healing, because I think we talk a lot about trauma, but we don't talk about the benefits of having a person like Homa go through the healing.
Thank you, Marjan.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you. Far none the best thing to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have many more questions, but I imagine our audience does as well. So this is, and Helen's standing by with a microphone. If I drop my glasses. So
please raise your hand.
yes, so we're going to take questions, and then we'll also see if the Zoom people have one, but please go ahead.
Hi, I loved your book. I thought it was amazing and beautiful. And yes, I cried at the end. My question for you is really about generations. You mentioned just recently trauma and the impact of trauma, and you could have chosen to kind of weave trauma throughout the book, but I believe it really is a story about hope. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how you maybe purposely made that happen and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think in today's world, we talk a lot about psychotherapy. We talk about all kinds of talk therapy, medication, self-help books. Somebody like Homa in 1960 didn't have access to those ways of processing trauma, and also didn't even have the terminology to identify what it was that happened to her. So I wanted to show how back in the day, a woman like Homa would come out of something that happens to her through her own means, with nothing but her own heart, her own brain, her own 2 feet, and her own resourcefulness, and yes, the support of family. But I really wanted to show how you can do it without those other things.
Thank you. Anyone else? Right here, Helen.
I loved your book as well. And my question is, today you've talked a lot about different types of revolutions. You talked about the women's rights revolution, you talked about the revolution in Iran, and then we in Lexington have our own type of revolution. I was wondering, what does the word revolution mean to you?
That's such a good question. I think it means a situation where your world is cleaved into before and after, where everything you thought was once true or one way becomes something else entirely. And that's what happened with the revolution in Iran. And that's, I would think, happened with the revolution here. We also have our own personal revolutions, right? Like the death of a loved one or a certain thing that happens to us. We know our world is cleaved into before and after. That's sort of how I define it.
Good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Come on, Lexington. Okay, in the back.
Oh, hey. I love being in Lexington.
Okay. I actually have a question that came out of Together Tea. Am I allowed to ask that?
Yes.
Yes.
So in Together Tea, there's this amazing, can you hear me?
Yes.
There's this amazing moment where the young woman from America, Iranian woman, goes back to Iran. And it's the 1980s, and she's wearing her, 1980s.
Laura Ashley dress.
Laura Ashley.
And she goes to a party, and it's such an eye opener for her, but also for me. That if that's what it was like in post-revolutionary Iran, where you had to show up in all of your headscarves and everything, and then all of a sudden you fling it off, and you were in your evening gown or your short skirt or whatever. And is that real?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's absolutely real. One life outside and then another life behind closed doors. And I would say of all three of my books, Together Tea is the most autobiographical, where the character's my age again, my resourcefulness in not wanting to figure stuff about the timeline. But yeah, that happened to me. I went to a party there. I wore my Laura Ashley dress. And I was by far the squarest, nerdiest, most behind pop culture person in that place. And everybody was so tuned in to what's going on in the West. And this was that scene happened, a really long time ago in the book and in real life. So you can imagine with the internet, it's even more that way.
So cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
More questions? I saw a hand over here. No?
How high is the fire?
How high is the fire is the question.
I have a few fellow Iranians in the room. I mean, they were pretty high. Am I not? I'm not exaggerating. They're pretty. I don't know how we did. How did we do that? We did it though. Like I don't know. Some could be really waist level, right? Yeah.
Because I was there after the revolution and Israeli has celebrated very seriously, and sometimes the fire was as high as the building, but we have to wait until it settles down, then we get a
Okay. Oh, there's a question in the back. Or two questions.
Hi.
Question about the cover. I haven't read the book yet. I can't wait. And you picked beautiful artwork on your covers. How did you decide the typography and the art design and so forth for the book cover for this one and maybe some of the others?
I wish I could say how I decided. I didn't decide it. The publisher decided it all, including the title. And so they presented the cover to me, and I was stunned by the colors. I think the colors are so exquisite and elegant, and I loved it. I was a little worried about the bird because that's an ancient mythical bird, the Homa bird. And I thought people would think it looked like a dragon. And then they showed me the ancient Persian mythological books from which they took the bird. I said, okay. So I told them to give the bird a pedicure because she had these claws that made her look a little mean. So they did that. But the art director is amazing. And some art directors in publishing houses read the book and then they know the tone, the atmosphere, the vibe. and other art directors don't. And so I was very lucky that this art director for both the Stationery Shop and the LION Women of Tehran, and she made them match. She made them sort of echo one another. So no, I take no credit. That's all them. That's all them.
Amazing book, Marjan. I've read all three of yours. I have two questions, if I may. So the first one, a comment and a question. The first one is, the fire scene, the bonfire scene was my favorite. I was actually nervous, without giving away anything to those who haven't read it, that it was so slowly played out, as you said, as I was reading it in my mind as well, that I was worried as to what the outcome was going to be for either of the characters. So that's just a comment. My question, and this is a naive question, but I just have to ask it. You've written 3 books, you've gone on book tours, you've received feedback, you've talked to your fans, etc. Do you ever sit back and think about how any of those books might have been different in that, meaning, I wish I had written it this way, or it's missing this, or if I had done that, it might have been better. Do you ever sort of sit back, or are you just really happy with the way they all come out?
I mean, I'm sure they all could be better. I'm sure they all could be improved, but I never ever think that, because they're like a snapshot of where my heart was at that time. So to be honest, I couldn't write Together Tea today. There's no way I could write it today, because I just don't have access to that emotional memory that I did back in 2013. I could not write The Stationery Shop today. Sorry to say. I was in a different place when I wrote it, and I could access that kind of intensity. And now I feel like I couldn't. So I'm sure they could all be improved upon. Many, many, many books could always be improved upon, but I leave them alone. When I'm done with them, I'm usually just stunned that they even happened. And then I worry that I can never do it again.
We have a couple more minutes ready for last questions. Oh, I see a hand.
Hi, I would like to ask questions about the second book.
Yeah.
I liked it so much, has so much details about Iran and women at that period. It made me feel like I'm living there. There's so many details. But the fact that after several years they met and they were so calm. I know the age difference, but do you have a specific message? Like at the end, they just had closure. Oh, do you intend like a specific message, by the way, after so many years they met so calmly and they ended up? Because it was so touchy.
Yeah, I feel that book is a very emotional read, and there's a lot of crying. There was a lot of crying on my part writing it. There's lots of tissues. Probably people like Cary could hear somebody sobbing in the cubicle. Again, it was the only message was love outlasts loss. But spoiler, there's a lot of loss, but their love remained. And so that's my only message. And I also wanted to give the character what so many of us don't have in real life, which is the benefit of dealing with her unfinished business. Yeah. And that's the beauty of fiction, is your characters get to go places emotionally that we don't necessarily do. And sometimes it's a problem in real life, because I think like that's how real life works, and apparently it's not. Like, you don't get to have a resolution scene, unfortunately. Yeah, but it's very satisfying in fiction.
Last call for.
I have a question from Zoom.
Great.
Can you talk a little about your revision process? Does your fire page remain the same in the final draft? Can you talk about your writing routine?
The revision process is a complete sort of revisioning of the first draft. And so there are many, many, many things that are in the first draft that don't end up in the final book. And with the LION Women of Tehran, it was the first time where I finished the draft and it went to my editor and we added 7 scenes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we didn't cut a single word. We added 7 scenes. I think the revision is the most important stage of the writing. I don't know what to say other than a lot of thinking, a lot of walking. It's good to be bored in life, you know, like you shouldn't always be entertained or looking at your phone because nothing will come to you. So lots and lots of long walks, lots of staring at the wall. Some days a work day means sitting at the table like this and just thinking, what the heck, you know? I do have a whiteboard and I write things out. I don't know what to say. It's just like figuring it out. It's like solving a puzzle. It's like solving a puzzle. And then when you finally solve it, you just know you've solved it. It doesn't mean things turn out hunky-dory. It just means you've solved the puzzle for this book. Yeah.
And we're very glad that you solved the puzzle. Thank you so much, Martha.
Thank you.